We're going to start our staff meeting of January the 27th. Before we get started, I'd like to make a motion to excuse Vice President Reese.
Second.
Commissioner Summer Dumas.
Yes.
Commissioner Dreehouse.
Yes.
Thank you. And our first agenda item is a health update. Greg Kesterman, welcome. So good to see you always, our health commissioner.
Good morning. I am focusing on influenza today.
Okay.
And I appreciate the opportunity. It has been a few months since I've been down here, so I appreciate the opportunity to update you.
Certainly.
One of my favorite things when I think about influenza is a quote from Dr. Fagans, our medical director, and I'm not sure if he stole this from elsewhere, but he says it often, and it is, if you've seen one flu season, you've seen one flu season. Every flu season is unique, and the slides I'll show, you'll see a downward trend for influenza right now, but that does not mean that influenza is gone for the season. It doesn't mean that we won't see another peak. We really don't have a great mechanism for prediction with influenza. So the first slide I have here, I'll point out, we often talk about respiratory season as opposed to just flu or COVID-19 season, as we see lots of fluctuation with respiratory viruses. As the population moves inside in the winter months, we start to see these types of viruses spread because we're in close proximity to one another. Influenza season or respiratory season typically goes from September until about mid-May, and we typically local health as well as state and federal partners track influenza throughout those months, so dashboards are active during those time periods. Also, here in Southwest Ohio, given the close proximity to other local jurisdictions, as well as us being the major hub for hospital systems, we typically track influenza as Southwest Ohio as opposed to just Hamilton County. So the slides I have today are related to Southwest Ohio. And as you can see from the slide here, it was a very drastic influenza season with regards to hospitalizations, which is one of our key metrics for tracking influenza. You may recall when I briefed the commission during COVID-19 era, oftentimes we don't have a real great sense of what's circulating in the community, but when somebody goes to the hospital and becomes hospitalized, we test them and we know what has caused illness. So this is a very good predictor for what's happening in the community. This year's hospitalization numbers, we saw over 931 hospitalizations in Southwest Ohio, with the last week of December having 302, so a pretty significant year. In fact, this year's hospitalization numbers are 2.5 times greater than the 5-year average, so a very significant season for sure. On the next slide, I'll touch briefly on flu deaths, which deaths due to pneumonia and influenza are tracked for the whole state of Ohio using CDC's analysis. And I'll point out that they're not done on the local level, very similar also to when we talk COVID-19, because small geographic sizes, we try really hard to mask individuals so that we don't give away identities. So it's tracked on the state level also because of a time lag that we see with getting reports of flu deaths and the final determination of cause of death. This year's mortality numbers are actually 30% lower than the 5-year average, suggesting that we're seeing a decrease this year in mortality due to flu. So that's a good thing. We're not seeing folks succumb to their illness. They are able to get treatment, generally speaking, in the hospital systems. The last metric, the last traditional metric that I'll share on the next slide is in addition to the two metrics I just shared, we also track emergency department visits for influenza-like illness. So far this season, Southwest Ohio region saw a total of 3,900 emergency department visits for fever and influenza-like illness, with the peak being in December with 537 ED visits. This represents about 3% of total admissions into the ED, which was fairly significant, but not as significant as previous years, as you can see from the chart. And then my last slide for this morning, here in Ohio, we have started doing something very unique called wastewater monitoring. And so here in Hamilton County, we have 2 locations that we're able to do monitoring for things like influenza. And as you can see, both last winter and again this winter, the peaks correlate very nicely with the influenza hospitalization slides that I just showed. This is really promising, tying back to my comment from earlier. We don't always know when someone is ill. A lot of times folks get better at home. They keep sick at home, as we always preach, and we don't know about that illness. This is a tool tool for us to help start understanding what's in the community. It's an early sentinel for us to understand if COVID-19 is spiking. It works for flu. It worked this year. In addition, it's a tool that MSD could use to understand if industrial pollutants are making it into the wastewater stream. And there's a promising location in Summit County. They are actually looking for illicit drugs, including methamphetamines, cocaine, and fentanyl. So it's promising that we might be able to see early indications of increases in use of these types of substances, and we might be able to intervene earlier with this type of knowledge. So that is overview of influenza this season, and I would be happy to take any additional questions you guys might have.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. I'm looking at vaccinations, and so would you like to make a statement about how that impacts our flu season?
So we are still encouraging getting your flu vaccine as well as all of your childhood vaccinations for those that have questions. There has been some shifts in the federal government, how they're looking at vaccines, but really the public health message has not shifted, and that is to talk to your provider. There have always been instances in which parents have concern about certain vaccines, and no one can give you better advice than your medical provider. Generally speaking, all of the vaccines are still available through your insurance provider, meaning they're covered. And typically speaking, most of the professional medical organizations have not shifted in their mindset. And so most families, from what we can tell, are still choosing to get vaccinated.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And this last, the wastewater monitoring, is there a reason why you picked Little Miami and Mill Creek? Or
those are the largest, from my understanding, those are the largest two watersheds. And so those are the two that were selected with the resources that were available.
okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Driehaus.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. A little PTSD, you being here, because I'm more used to seeing you during COVID. But it's good to see you nonetheless, different occasion. I do want to say, too, that I hear Dr. Fagans on the radio all the time as a local expert, and I feel like he's an old friend to all of us because he was so critical during the COVID-19 days, and he was our medical expert. So please give us him our regards, but it's really good, and I appreciate whatever you are doing to make sure that his voice is heard in our community, so people have good information related to, whether it's the flu or COVID or anything else. I just have one question related to one of your slides. So the number, I'm glad to see that the death count is lower than it has been, but also struck by the number of cases that have ended up at the hospital. And so why do you think that's happening, in this year as opposed to what has happened in other years?
So every flu season, as I mentioned, is a little different. It does appear that the flu that's circulating in our community is viral. I can't say the word. It spreads super easy this season. And so when folks came together at the end of December for the holidays, they were able to spread it, causing for folks to get ill. Only those that typically have the weaker immune systems ended up in the hospital. So we didn't see a lot of pediatric flu cases this year, which is good news. But if you had a weakened immune system, it caused issues.
Okay. And while you're here, I can't resist to talk about a little bit about COVID. My sister just had COVID and really suffered from it. She's young. She's youngish. Kathy, I hope she's not listening. Lord, I'm going to pay for that. Man. I'm older than she is. But she really suffered from it. It went for days, and she had quite a bit of fog. And so I'm wondering, what is the status of COVID in the community? I know that people should still get vaccinated for both the flu and for COVID, but what are we seeing out there?
So we don't see nearly as much tracking of COVID as we would have seen 5 years ago, where folks were reporting test results and we had greater access to testing. But what we do see is similar to influenza, where folks who end up in the hospital because of influenza, we actually know that they have, in this case, COVID if they get the test. We are not seeing significant circulation at this exact moment, but from past few years from COVID-19, we know that in August and again in January, we have seen spikes, January typically being the bigger spike. And so to hear someone having COVID in the last week or two is not surprising. And it would not be surprising if we saw a spike in early February, since we have yet to see a spike this January.
Have you heard, anecdotally, have you heard anything about the severity of the symptoms of COVID versus anything we've seen before?
I have not heard any of our medical professionals talking about this being a significant year. Individuals react differently. So, an individual may have more severe than someone else, but so far we haven't seen significant hospitalizations leading us to believe that this is a really significant year for COVID-19.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you. So nice to see you again.
Good to see you all.
Good to see you also.
Greg, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but when you talked about vaccinations, did you say anything about the relative vaccination rate in the community? I'm sorry if I missed that. Have we seen a decline in the number of people getting vaccinated, an increase, or is it about the same as it used to be?
So for childhood vaccinations, reporting has always not been mandatory, and so we don't have great counts. But what we do know is post-COVID-19, we have seen some decline in vaccination rates for the key childhood immunizations, which is not great news, particularly when you hear occasionally measles, for example, spreading in a community. You want higher vaccination rates to prevent the spread of measles. But I think that's the reality that we have in post-COVID. There's a fear from some for vaccinations.
Got it. And then just one last question. I was listening to a science podcast recently that was talking about the effectiveness of hand washing versus these things, and it was primarily talking about stomach viruses and talking about how the sanitizers that stomach viruses many times because of the makeup of the particular virus were many times immune to this type of stuff. They just had kind of some sort of harder shell around the virus that made hand washing more effective than this for stomach viruses. Anything you would say in terms of that for just typical influenza?
Yeah, so just in general, good old-fashioned hand washing has always been the go-to. If you don't have access to hand sinks and soap and water and towels, then hand sanitizer is a good alternative. But hand sanitizer doesn't get the dirt off. It does deactivate some of the germs, and as you indicated, sometimes they are immune to the sanitizer and do not die. From my good old days of being a food inspector, washing your hands does one layer of removing the germs, but also drying your hands with a paper towel takes off even additional dirt from your hands. And so good old hand washing with soap and water, singing happy birthday while you do it to make sure you're standing in front of that sink for a good 20 seconds and getting the tops and bottoms, and then using a paper towel to dry them off is really the best for preventing illness.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Okay. Our next agenda item is affordable housing update. Luke Blocker, Cincinnati CDF. I'll just say that. Come forward. Welcome. Thank you.
Got here just in the nick of time. I was having a hard time finding parking out there. Yeah. Go. Thank you, Commissioners. It's always a pleasure to be here and talk about this great partnership that we're really proud of the work together. I have a little presentation I think you all received. I know it's a pretty big agenda, so I'm going to try my best to move quickly through this. And of course, I'll stay for as many questions as you all have, as always. Okay. And I should say what I'm doing today is just give an update. I think what's asked to do is give an update on where we are, and then talk specifically about, the remaining year we're looking at. Do this every time, but I'll go quickly. We've been at CDF. We've been around for 38 years now. We think of ourselves as a partner, and I think that we really think about, and I think this is a critical part of why this partnership has worked so well, we're really a bridge between our funders and what the goals they want to achieve and the builders of whatever it is we're trying to build in the real estate world. And we make sure those connections happen, and we make sure that the projects that develop are going to work. And that's sort of our role in the middle of that. And we're trying to do that and be as useful as we can to all of our partners, and the county being one of our biggest partners around. What are the goals? How do we help achieve them? We're a partner to help achieve goals. We do that through a combination of both receiving and making two different types of funds. One is we actually get loans from banks, from philanthropy, in a complicated way from the federal government that are essentially low cost loans to us that we then make low-cost loans out to the development community, and then subsidies that we manage on behalf of local governments. Both of those things need to come together in most projects to make them happen. And who we work with, and again, this gets to the point of the sort of our role in the system, we really work with everybody who wants to accomplish goals in the space. We're working with the governments, we're working with the nonprofit partners, we're working with the builders, the developers, we're working with the community development corporations, and we're working with the other funders, the banks, the philanthropy. We're really trying to be that connector in the middle to help achieve goals. This is something that we're going to release later this year. That is a 10-year impact report, and it's just a little context of sort of the work. And our fiscal year is kind of unique. It actually ends March 31st, so this is sort of something looking at through March of 2025. But the 10-year impact from looking back through that across everything we do. And I think, again, the idea is we're helping to deliver results that are sought, and we're getting a lot more investment beyond the investments that we're putting into projects, and we're doing it across the region. And then just in this fiscal year now, starting in March, from March of 25, we're at a 750 plus affordable housing units financed, which is tracking with where we've been the last couple of years of this big partnership. Okay, let's now talk about specifically our partnership. This is, the lawyer in me wants to read the exact contract terms. I can't get away from that part of myself. So we call this, with the county, the Hamilton County American Rescue Plan Act Affordable Housing Program. That's sort of what this partnership is called in the contract we have that was in way back in December of 2022. We executed that contract. You all set 3 goals in there, 3 different types of projects: new units, renovated units, and then targeted populations: seniors, disabled citizens, and returning citizens. So that was a sort of initial framework that we started with back in December of 2022. We also added, along the way, you all added some priorities, and also there were priorities in the contract. So in addition to those 3 big buckets, there was emphasis on geographic diversity in the original contract, sort of all over the county. There was a real emphasis on trying to support smaller, burgeoning, emerging real estate developers of color, folks who were trying to build capacity in the industry. And then there was a sense we wanted to try to do this across the range. We didn't want to have all the funds going to one income level. We wanted to try to have a range of income levels served, all affordable, but at a range. And then over time, you all sort of made some, in these settings and otherwise, sort of added some more clarity around your goals, around more investment outside the city of Cincinnati. And then, of course, we've talked many times, the tiny homes focus was added at the end of 2024. Yes, end of 2024. Okay, so let's talk about then quickly just a summary of where we are. And I want to say before I get into these numbers, we share these regularly with the administration. We certainly want to talk about, when we get to the finish line of this, let's do something to sort of like capture the whole impact. Let's sort of do something around what was the whole impact of this, and I think I would say success, but I think we're looking to do that. But right now, this is a snapshot of where we are now. Almost $30 million deployed of the original 33.5. I think it's gone up to 36 roughly in total, with some additions from you all. About $30 million in about 30 projects. That's leveraged $344 million of other investment. So every $1 that you all committed, there was $10.68 of other money coming into projects, which is the basic goal of leverage. You don't want to have your dollars be acting alone. Almost 1,100 units financed to date. In the original contract, we'd set a goal that was sort of based off of projections around how the program might aspire to operate, around 750 units. So we feel really good about the fact that we've been able to stretch those dollars further and get to this number. And we're not finished yet, but get to the number of almost 1,100. Just a couple projects that we wanted to highlight because they show the sort of span of what we've been doing together. We've talked a lot about it, but I think you can never talk about enough the LAD project that was truly, genuinely unique and required not just, it would not have happened but for this investment from the county, but it also, I think, really highlights the partnership because for that project, ultimately, we spent probably 2 years working together to get to the end point where we could be confident the county's dollars the project would happen. We made several loans earlier on to allow LAD to go out and acquire the property, to do the stuff they needed to do at the beginning to make sure the project could happen. I think if we had tried to do that in reverse order, we couldn't have been certain about the outcomes. Alexandra is just a very good example of a really significant renovation of a building, a beautiful old building in Walnut Hills is a senior housing. It was at the end of its, I'd not say that it's the end of its useful life, but it is a project that needed significant reinvestment. Very likely it would have turned into market rate housing had we not made this investment because of its location. Now it's got it's new investment in 30 more years of affordability for seniors in a neighborhood, and specifically a block, if you all remember, in Walnut Hills, it's been completely reborn. With the entire block is new apartment buildings. It's very exciting. Preserving this long-term affordability there for seniors is a huge accomplishment. And then Pedretti Place, which is another example of, and was early on, but an example of a great senior project in Delhi Township that's embraced by the township, embraced by all the partners, and is now operating and serving seniors today. Just a couple of examples of, I think, we've talked here before, and I completely agree that part of the job of us and the partnership is to make sure people know this is happening, make sure that people know that where these dollars have gone and what the impacts have been. I think we can never do enough of this, but here's some examples of some local media that sort of captured the success of the program, talked about individual programs. I think the LAD model, and I will make sure I want to invade, if you can let Commissioner Reese know this, she said at the beginning, we were here 3 years ago, I want people to come to this LAD project and think of it as a national model. And I think that it is, and I think it's really cool that we got a headline that literally says that. And there's a couple, I should mention, there have been a couple national media articles that have talked about the innovation of this and lauded the innovation of this program between local governments and a CDFI working together. So there's more examples of this, but this is just something that I think we take seriously as part of the job here. And I hope you all have seen those as well. Okay, now I want to talk about sort of where we are time-wise, project pipeline, what's happening. And there's some updates, and there's some sort of, just some updates I want to walk through. I think we've shared this with you a little bit in individual meetings. We have, going up from the bottom, there's $5.3 million remaining of uncommitted ARPA dollars right now. We have been focused on that top line, which is the areas that you all have made clear are areas of priority. That includes the Tiny Homes Initiative, but also projects outside the city of Cincinnati and returning citizens and veterans. Okay, so what is reflected in those numbers up there, the $1 million and the $3.6 million, those are projects we're working through right now that are in those categories, that we're trying to get to the point where we can say this is going to happen. Like this will definitely happen in the timeline we need it to happen for the money to be deployed. And as a reminder, that means by the end of this year, the rules are the money has to be deployed into projects. And that is, so with the scenario we want to avoid is we commit money today, let's just say theoretically, to a project, and then we find out in November that it can't happen because it can't get the zoning it needs, or there's some community opposition, whatever the issue is, then we're really sort of stuck. And the worst case scenario is we somehow don't comply with the rules, and I'm not even sure what the consequences are of that, but I don't think any of us want to face that. Or the other is we're making a really rushed decision at the 11th hour to try to get the money out the door. So we've been trying to avoid that scenario. And one of the things that we just resolved internally is to say in our sort of management of all these projects, and again, we've been working with most of these projects for many, many, many months. In the instance of the Tiny Home Project with Tiny Homes for Humanity for about a year, to try to get them to the point where we can be confident. We're saying we're going to target in the month of March to be able to, by the beginning of April, say here's our sort of final commitments, so we can be confident. We're going to make these final determinations with your all counsel, and then be able to make sure we move forward in time to meet the time deadlines. I would say specifically on tiny homes, we continue to make progress in ways I know are not as fast as we all would have liked, but I can say now we have received a full application, which is to fill out the application, you have to have more than an idea. You have to have a bunch of things that we require that show the project could actually happen. We are cautiously optimistic that the current version of this that's being pursued by Tiny Homes for Humanity can work. We're working through a pretty ambitious structure that would, in essence, make a sort of conditional commitment that we say, hey, we're going to give you X period of time to get these 3 or 4 things that you have to get done for us to know the project will work, including things around zoning, building permits, and funding. But we want to make this happen. We want to do everything we can, which is much further than we ordinarily go. Ordinarily, we want people to have everything sort of at the buttoned up stage, and we were able to then bring it over the top. This is sort of going in the reverse order. But because of the direction and clarity that you all have provided over time, and because of the work that this group has done over the course of a year, we're going to do everything we can to try to make that happen. And we're going to do that over the next couple months, everything we can to make that work. And we're going to come with more updates on that beyond this meeting today. But I wanted to give that small update. And the other, and I should say about the tiny homes as well, that we've been working on this, as we've discussed many times. This is the only project that's really come to the fore that has gotten even halfway this far. There really hasn't. We haven't gotten any serious inquiries or from any other people. But this one we've been working with, and we feel that there is a path. We want to try to make it happen. The other projects in there are again some reentry projects we've been working with, some projects outside the city that we're trying to see, as we all have experienced and encountered. There is sometimes opposition to affordable housing projects in different communities. We have a very good potential project that would be of great size and impact. Open question how the community process is going to go. So we have to all wait for that process before we can decide what to do. One more thing on tiny homes, and I'll move on, but these are both related. I think Greg Johnson was in here a couple of weeks ago from CMHA. We're actually meeting with him tomorrow to talk about the idea he brought you all a couple of weeks ago, talk more in depth about that idea. I want to sort of add some color to his comments around how things didn't work out with the tiny homes project, unfortunately, in their land. The real fundamental problem that Greg hinted at, just so you all know and understand, is that whenever CMHA wants to dispose of land, they have to go through this process with HUD that takes, they say, anywhere from 18 to 24 months. I think sometimes it can go faster, sometimes it can go slower. But we can't know that's actually going to work until we get to the end of that process. So I think the timeline on when that process would run was just beyond the timeline of when we'd have to decide about deploying these funds. On top of that, HUD or CMHA is required to sell their land at the appraised value. This project doesn't work if the developer has to pay the full appraised value for the property, which in that case I think was something like $400,000. Like, there's just no way to financially make it work. I think there has to be land donated for this to work. So there was just structural reasons that couldn't ever work out. But we deeply appreciate, and we're glad that the CMHA made the effort and sort of went above and beyond and tried to make this work. And I think it's because of the focus that you all have given to this. Okay, stepping back for a second. Those are what we're working on right now to try to get figured out in this March timeframe, to that top bullet. That middle bullet says alternative immediate investment opportunities. Those are projects that we're working on in our pipeline. We could deploy all $5.3 million of that to those right now. Those are projects in the city. So we haven't been deploying those because of the discussions we've all been having. But I just want to give the context that that's there. One, it's there as we've got projects that can be used, right? That's not an issue. And I want to make sure it's clear that the reason that we've gotten to $5.3 million, the reason we still have funds left is not because there wasn't demand. It's because there wasn't demand we couldn't get, the projects haven't gotten to the point in your focus areas, in the tiny homes and outside the city, to move the money. But there's absolute big demand for this program outside of that. And then that second bucket, that last bullet there is sort of midterm. So those are projects that still need a little more time to come to fruition, but there's close to $22 million of ballpark need in those projects. And we just use this to illustrate, this is sort of what we're doing with the program, is building this pipeline of projects so that as funds are available, we know they can be deployed, we know the outcomes can be delivered. Okay, that was long. Only got a couple more bullets here. I appreciate everyone's attention and patience. Just a couple closing remarks on takeaways from the program. I think we've had a real sense of a difference about how we need to operate between gap filling, which is a project is, and some of the things we all did together at the very beginning fit this to a T. Pedretti Place was one project that had everything lined up. It was completely ready to go every other way, but there was a gap of a certain number of dollars that couldn't be filled anywhere else but with a subsidy. That is a simpler exercise because really they've done, all the other pieces are in place. That will always be a piece of any program like this because that's the traditional way to do traditional affordable housing is you always have a gap. So then you either have a local program that can fill that gap or you don't. And if you have one, it's a pretty good system and developers can know it's out there and can build their plans around it. And that's what we've been having this discussion for a while around. If we want more of this out in the county, we have to figure out a way to set that expectation over time so developers will do that work over time. And communities can engage in that discussion over time. The other side of this is trying to do catalyzing investments. And that is sort of the LAD example is more like that. This tiny homes example is more like that, where you're actually trying to use the availability of these funds to convince someone at the front end, let's come up with a plan, let's figure out this structure. And in some instances, these are with people who aren't really developers. That's not their core business. So it's also a little bit of a challenge to help figure out the right way to bring that group along to the outcome they want in a way that doesn't put them in a bad position because they've taken on this real estate project that all of a sudden they've got this like debt hanging over their heads or there's these issues that they've got to manage long term that's not really their core business. So we've learned a lot, have spent a lot of time, and if you were to ask us, if you were to like look at our if we broke out our timesheets by sort of the projects we worked on, I'd say we spend 75% of our time on these catalyzing projects and spending time trying to figure them out, how they work, helping the developer or the builder or the group along versus the gap filling projects, which are more straightforward. I've mentioned this before, but I think it's just a reality we have to contend with and decide how we want to all collectively respond. But in addition to the lack of a sort of development infrastructure outside the city, meaning there's not a lot of developers who've done a lot of those projects, the communities aren't as used to it, there isn't a sort of community development corporation type local development agency that helps push things along. There's just a lot of more challenges or less capacity to do this type of work around affordable housing in particular, but I think a lot of multifamily housing outside the city of Cincinnati. And that's made harder by sometimes there's opposition or confusion or unease about it. And I think that is not to say that as a criticism of anybody, but it is to acknowledge that's a reality. And we have to figure out, are there communities that want this type of affordable housing? And if they are, or if they have questions, how do we answer those questions? How do we help them identify what they want so then we can help bring them what they want as a county and as CDF as a partner? But there's work to be done there. I want to acknowledge that. Cost escalation is something that we've been talked about throughout this program, but it just is important to understand that basically from the time we started working together, costs went up sometimes 100%, in some metrics. They've stabilized, but they're not like going back down. And so it remains an issue that the costs of real estate development in most instances outstrip the returns on real estate development that can be predicted. And it's absolutely true when you're talking about income restricted affordable housing. So there sort of continues to be need for this type of function, for this type of development to happen. This is like a little bit in the weeds, but it's important to understand the context. OFA is the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. It's the group that sets the rules for how all the tax credits get deployed that are a really big tool. They've really become, their scoring has become almost exclusively location-based. It used to be based on a variety of other factors. Now it's just about, we're picking the census tracts around the state that we think need affordable housing. And so many of those are in county jurisdictions because they're places where there's more of a spread between the market rents and what would be the affordable rents. They're basically saying to everybody, this is where we want the housing. So then it becomes up to all of us to respond to that. But that hasn't always lined up with where communities want affordable housing. And so that's a systemic issue that we're all navigating. I think we say it all the time, but I never want to not say it. Leveraging works. I think that's the proof of this program over time. Like we're pulling funds together, having them work together, it just delivers more impacts, and it's a system that I think works. And along with that, one thing that we collectively as a system, I think, has gotten a lot better in these 3 years is, and I would say this is between all, it's not a finished project, but I think there has been dramatic improvement between the sort of what I would call the civic partners, the governments, the nonprofit sector like us, the sort of nonprofit finance sector, around work, not necessarily that everyone agrees on everything together, but you at least coordinate and communicate so things are happening in a way that can have a chance of working together. And I'm really, really, really proud as a former city employee myself of how much we have built a relationship of working directly with the county administration, not just the senior leadership, but the community development folks on like, what are we all seeing? What are we all doing together? Is there a way we can do this together? Is there a way that one person is better to do this than the other? That is, I think, obviously good, but doesn't happen in the natural order of things. And I think it's really a great step forward that I'm excited to keep working on. And we're really, you all made a great hire with the new community development head. She's really impressive. We're excited to keep working with her. Okay, the last thing I would say is, I think that it's worth saying that this has been a successful program, that this was something that was not the obvious thing for you all to do 3 years ago. It was something that had never been done by the county. It was a vision that was, I think, a chance, and I think it's been successful. And I think we should all celebrate it. I know we certainly celebrate it. More importantly, it really met the moment. I've said this a lot, but this happened at the exact right moment when every other factor in the system was working against affordable housing getting built, like dramatically. And the fact that this program was set up by the county at that exact moment and could meet that moment, there are hundreds of units that would have, I would say everything that I just showed, the 1,000 units, some of them would have happened eventually. Many of them would have never happened, and definitely not the 1,100 that have been done to date. And there's no question that is a direct result of the choices that were made by you all 3 years ago. We have cycled a stat around over the last couple of years, but in the first 2 years, this is just something that was in the city because there was more of a comparative. There wasn't as much of a comparative outside the county, but we tripled the production over the previous 3-4 years in the city. And I think just to conclude, and maybe this is something that I've said too many times, but I think this is really, the other really exciting thing is that now almost 3 years into this partnership, and 3 years into this larger leverage partnership across the region, this is now a platform to keep going. This is now something that didn't exist before. It's a system that shows results, that we don't have to create anew. We now have to figure out, it's not easy, but we have to figure out how to keep it going in different ways, and we're never stopping on that work. But it's something that's there now to keep advancing these goals going forward, and that didn't exist 3 years ago. So that's my summary / reflections, and I will stop there for any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Commissioner Dreehouse, do you have any comments or questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you, Luke, for being here. Appreciate the presentation. Just a couple of questions. The tiny home issue is something that we've all kind of been keyed into. And I don't know if you can divulge this, but as you say, you've got a relationship with someone that has submitted an application. That's good news. Is there a defined location for this yet? I know that the CMHA location did not work out. I don't know if you can divulge that or not, but can you tell us?
There is. I'm hesitant to get ahead of their process of sort of community engagement, but I can say there is a location with a church who is I think they have some agreements in principle about how this could work. I think now there's let's get into the specifics of making sure this is essentially a legally binding option, as opposed to one that's conversation. But every indication we have, and in talking to all sides of this discussion, is very optimistic that that's going to work.
Thank you. Thank you for that generalized answer, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
All right. Then let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges here, particularly related to having these projects outside the city. I think, we are county commissioners, and so we need to make sure that we represent all 49 jurisdictions in the county, and I think we take that to heart. But I also have heard you say, and I've witnessed firsthand, that some really great projects have not moved forward because the community simply doesn't have the appetite for those projects. And whether that is a matter of them not having information early on, or being kind of part of the process, or just being opposed, I think it has varied. But I know that's what we're dealing with in some of these locations. I'm curious to know from you, because it leads into my last question, which is, I don't have a sense of how many projects have, through our dollars, have been funded inside versus outside the city. So if you, is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Knowing that some of those are more challenging outside, because we've got some money to spend here and we have a deadline. So I'm wondering on all those things, if you could give me the percentage, I would love to know that. And then your thoughts related to some of the challenges that we have seen and how to sort through those.
I'm trying to I'm literally just looking at our
projects
map in my head and trying to remember where. And there's actually a pretty good spread around, but inside the county and out around actual sort of locations. But part of that is because we have a lot of single-family home projects out in the county, so the unit number is not as big, but the actual physical spread is. It's probably closer to that 60-40. It's definitely not 50-50.
Okay.
It's probably closer to that 60-40, maybe even a little bit more on the city versus county.
And I think the investment number is probably the number to use, right? What have we invested both inside and outside? And I know it's been challenging because it was kind of a new thing to go outside. As you just told us, there are a whole bunch of projects ready to go inside the city if we want to appropriate the money there. So so when you think about those challenges, what is being done, or what kind of conversations are being had?
Yeah, I think there's two challenges that are sort of on the same, two sides of the same coin. The one side is the builders of the housing, the developers, and there aren't as many who have as much experience doing this outside the county. And it's not that it's radically different from an architecture or whatever the nuts and bolts are. It's just they don't know, how will this go with the community engagement? How will the community react to this? They just don't have as much confidence, knowledge. And then sometimes there are issues around peculiarities of a local township's zoning code versus the city's zoning code, which isn't that hard, but it's just one more thing that they have to figure out that they didn't know before. I think that is a small obstacle. That's a pretty overcomable obstacle, particularly if you say, hey, there is funding available for projects in these areas. I think the bigger obstacle is sort of in those communities around. One, in the city of Cincinnati, you have more of these community development corporations that are on the ground in these neighborhoods, helping to identify development opportunities, engaging with their community constantly, who really help lay the groundwork for whatever's going to happen. And then they oftentimes are actual partners in the projects. Those really don't exist out in the county jurisdictions. And so that's a sort of added, and those relationships aren't simple. Like it can be complicated to work with the Community Development Corporation, but fundamentally it's something that from the perspective of the builder, it's like, oh, this is a partner that's helping get this through. And from the perspective of the community, this is a partner who is here, who is in this community, who is advocating for growth in this community, not from the one-off of a developer flying in with the project, but from a long-term, what's best for this community. The absence of that in many of these county jurisdictions mean that it is, every time a developer comes in, it's this one-off, out-of-nowhere project. And I think it's harder that is a disincentive to the developers, but it's also, I think, harder for the communities, township governments, if that's what it is, or the various community interests to react to a one-off project that they're trying to learn about versus this is part of as an example. There's this strategic corner we've had in our neighborhood that we've been, this is the golden vision of a community development corporation. We have worked with CDF and worked with the city and the Port Authority, and we've got control of these 2 or 3 buildings that are in this really important corner, and we've decided this is the kind of stuff we want here. We want some affordable housing, we want this sort of retail, and then the developers coming in to fulfill that community vision. It's harder for that to happen in the county because you don't have all those things. And then I think there is also a concern that, and I think we've talked this a little bit before, but we see this, that a project funded by the low-income housing tax credit is affordable. It's income restricted. It's a pretty big investment. It's either a brand new building or it's a significant multi-million-dollar renovation of an old building. What a lot of people hear when they hear the word affordable housing is actually sort of rundown, old, not in good shape buildings that are affordable because they're at the very bottom of the market. And people don't want those in their neighborhoods for good reason. But I think there is still an education sounds like education isn't even the right word. There's just a sort of community engagement around a low-income housing tax credit project is actually a significant amount of investment in a new building that oftentimes actually helps spur other developments because development follows development. But there is a concern that it's actually going to be this negative on our community. It's going to drive down property values. It's going to create problems that are associated with just bad, poorly managed housing, which is usually what people are thinking about. So, as usual, that was a long answer, but I think there is a continued need to discuss more about what we're actually talking about with these projects. And I think, we've all talked about this a little bit. I think there's an opportunity outside of any project to just have more of a conversation with community leaders in various townships around, one, and we've started to do this a little bit, what do you really want? What are your goals? And also, here's a little bit about what a LIHTC project actually is. And here's some more context. Not in here's a project, support, don't support, but laying the groundwork for the future. I think that we should all do that more, to try to do that groundwork laying.
Yeah, and I would say it's maybe exposure to some of these projects that have been really successful in some communities, whether they're inside or outside the city, and just a lack of experience related to those kinds of projects. I think that maybe that's because people rely on perceptions that may be old and outdated because they haven't seen the new projects that are going in. So that might be a component, because as you say, it's not really education, it's more of an exposure to what could be and what is in some of the communities that have embraced some of these projects. Yeah. So my last question then is related to that. So you just told us that there is a deadline, and we all know that there's a deadline related to these dollars. So, and because there's opportunity in the city that's there, but we have said, please let's get something done in some of these jurisdictions where that kind of investment has not traditionally taken place. At what point do you pull back and say, we cannot get this done in one of the outlying jurisdictions? We have to invest in the city, and it gives enough time for that project that you've got the confidence, that we have the confidence that that project will move forward with those dollars so that we don't have any dollars left on the table.
Yeah. What we're saying is we want to target the beginning of April for that. We're working with all of our project partners saying, hey, we've got to, exactly as you described, we've got to figure this out by March or else we're going to be facing this problem. So let's all agree on a deadline by then. Let's work our tails off over the next 2 months to see what we can figure out.
Okay, so we'll see you hopefully back around in that time frame so that we've got some sense of, whether or not some of these other projects could move forward or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Just thank you for your update. And when you say you're hoping for April, then when you come in April or the end of April, hopefully there will be a sheet of what you did this day, that day. So we're going to move quickly and not you necessarily, but not wait for April to come so we can invest in the city of Cincinnati. So when you come, I'll be asking for that checklist of what you did from now until April. Obviously, the results that you have right now speak for themselves. You've done a great job. We still want to, as you said, focus in the county. I have a few questions. So when you go outside of the city, do you talk to the CICs that are in different communities? I think Lincoln Heights might have one, community improvement councils, commissions or councils. Do you talk to them or Woodlawn, or do you just go in and talk to the administration? How do you do it when you approach them?
We've been focused on the administrations and then following their lead around whether they have a CIC, whether it's a CIC. Because I think my understanding of CICs is they're more sort of directly tied to the local governments. I think they're all appointed by the local governments. So we sort of follow their lead on the first question of like, what do you want, and then and also here's what we do, and how can this work together?
Okay. And so we talked about Lincoln Heights, and I had mentioned that a lot of pastors have lots of property out there, and you guys were going to look into that. And so when you talk about, I'm going to digress, when you talked about OFA and how they picked the areas, and I know Lincoln Heights is definitely an area that they picked. OFA put a lot of money into that. So what happened to looking at all those pastors out there that had different properties?
We follow. Every time, basically our process, every time you or anybody gave us a sort of lead, we followed up and just made ourselves available. And and if there was a response, then we had a conversation. We also connected them directly with the tiny homes builder. But so none of those connections ever got to the point of there being a real sort of this will work. In the meantime, there has been this other location that they've sort of spent some time on.
So I'm thinking specifically Lincoln Heights Baptist. When I talked to the pastor, he was really excited. He knew exactly what area you might be interested in. And so I just wonder what happened with that.
Yeah, I can go back and look through all of our communications, but I know that basically with every person that you referred to us, we just immediately followed up with them and said, hey, here's where we are, and then also again made the connection to the tiny homes developer if they sort of said they wanted to go that route. So I can't remember the specifics of that church, but I know that was the process we followed with everybody.
And really, of course, my focus and our focus was the tiny homes, but even if we could do affordable housing, a single family home on that property or any other property in that area. Now, the veterans home for the women that you were so excited about, you said they had everything together to make it happen. What happened to that one?
We're working with them right now. That's one of the projects that's sort of in my list of the projects we're trying to get across the finish line here. So and this is a good example of that catalyzing description I gave you. So they had their idea. We came back and said, okay, here's some of the things we're gonna have to figure out together. So they're on there working on those things around some of the things like architecture, some of the other just pieces. They're making some decisions about how they want to operate it. So that's an ongoing dialogue right now that we're going to keep pushing forward.
Okay. And so reentry housing, there was one house that they have, and then there's another one that you're working with them
Yeah,
on?
yeah.
And when do you see that?
It's in that same boat. We're doing, which is actually the exact same conversation we're having with them. So they're sort of the, if I'm remembering the specifics on this, I think the ball's in their court right now on the back and forth, but we're just having that back and forth so we can get it to the point where we feel it can definitely move forward. We're going to keep pushing those to make sure they happen.
What's the location of either one of both of those?
The
First one.
the first one is in, I believe, Westwood, although I could be remembering that wrong. And the second one is in Mount Auburn.
Okay, thanks. And then CMHA was here about a $2 million housing idea that they had. And I know the other tiny home element didn't work, but are you guys working together to see how we can maybe facilitate that partnership?
Yeah, in fact, we're meeting with them tomorrow to sort of dig into that together. But yeah, that's an ongoing conversation.
Okay. I heard you say you're going to meet tomorrow. I didn't forget that.
Okay.
But at what stage
Oh yeah,
are you?
sure. So they've shared with us what they shared with you all. So tomorrow we're going to really sit down and okay, let's talk through this. Where are you on this? What are the possibilities? And just helping us understand it a little better.
Okay, so it's the first meeting or introductory meeting. So, okay, I think that's all I have. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All righty. Next order of business is SBU Strategic Risk Reduction Initiative. Okay, we got Diana Christie is here, and you have some people with you. Okay.
Good morning, Commissioners.
This is going to do it. Okay.
My name is Reese Johnson. I'm Deputy Director and Chief Engineer for Metropolitan Sewer District. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you one of our SBU Strategic Risk Reduction Initiatives we are pursuing at MSD. This is very timely because there is an IGA with Sharonville that is on your agenda Thursday that would serve as the first implementation of this program. Slides ready? Great. Thank you. All right. So everything we do at MSD stems from our mission, which is to collect and treat wastewater from greater Cincinnati communities to protect both public health and the environment. Today I'll be talking a lot about SBUs and what we are doing to prevent them. So as a quick refresher on what they are, an SBU is the backup of the public sewer into a home or business caused by inadequate capacity in the public sewer. Qualified events are covered by our SBU program, and there are a ton of information about the program, both on our website and our YouTube channel. Videos, lots of information. The components of the MSD SBU program you're very familiar with. We've had this for over 20 years. The core components are up there on the slide. It involves 24/7 reporting, investigation, and then for eligible properties, both cleaning and reimbursement. And that often or sometimes leads to MSD installing a prevention device or an entire system on a home's sewer pipe. And that's effective. It can be very expensive, but ultimately it's very reactive. So with your support and your encouragement already, MSD has expanded the SBU program with additional, more strategic ways to reduce the risk of SBUs happening in the first place. This map shows the SBUs, the locations of SBUs by year over the last 8 years. We like to look at our data to see what it tells us. And we see that they're widespread across the entire area, but they're also clustered. Clustering is important. Zooming in on one particular, we have found these groups of SBUs that are connected hydraulically. They're all in the same sewer, and happen during storms that have a 10% chance of happening in a given year. It's a way we measure storms and rainfalls. And we've nicknamed these clusters Larissas. because they are areas that experience SBUs at these low recurrence intervals, these smaller storms. Initially, we identified 474 of these Larissas. Each has a unique set of challenges to solve it, but what they all have in common is that additional flow upstream of these areas only exacerbates the problem. So we traced the collection system upstream and delineated the area that drains to or through each Larissa. For example, everything within the area of 2042, which is shown on the slide here, drains right through. Let's see if I can get the laser pointer to work. Maybe not. Nope. So everything in this area drains through that cluster of homes with SBUs right there in the middle. Literally right down the pipes in front of these people's homes, and then down and out to the east. There's kind of a tab out to the east side. All of that area flows by that location. Yeah, so all of this area, everything flows down these two pipes and then out this way. All hydraulically connected. Any flow upstream, allowed upstream of here, is going to go right by there. Very important. Let's not lose that. So some Larissas, like this one, have a Larissa upstream of it. As you can see, there's another cluster of SBUs. The SBUs are these red dots. I apologize for not pointing that out, but the initial cluster that I zoomed in on, and there's another cluster all upstream of this. Or sometimes they have a common cause, so we've been able to condense them into just over about 200 discrete areas that we need to manage. So these Larissas are across the service area. They're not in a particular neighborhood or part of the county or city or townships. They're in areas that are served by combined sewers. They're in areas that are served by separated sewers. And all have to be considered when MSD receives a request for sewer service, which is common, happens all the time. These come from citizens asking for a new public sewer in their neighborhood, or maybe a developer putting in a new building or subdivision. Very common process. We want to make sure that there's availability in the sewer. So, for example, a proposed development is slated to add approximately 327 apartments in downtown Sharonville. This is hence why we have a IGA pending with pending for your review and approval with Sharonville. And this is in an area that Sharonville has recently invested heavily in, but unfortunately, it is just upstream of this Larissa area, number 2024. This flow, everything, all this flows through downtown Sharonville. MSD did not want to say no. We have a wonderful redevelopment happening, and we do not want to say no. So we started looking at other options. Do we route this to another sewer? That would require miles of new sewer. Very expensive. Do we just require more storage during storms? Unfortunately, this is a separated area already. Not unfortunately. Fortunately, this is a separated area, which is a good thing. But that means that the developer and the landowners don't have a lot of stormwater to manage that goes into our sewer. It is handled through the storm sewer. So that wasn't going to help. Wasn't going to help during a storm. Is there something else? Yes, there is something else. That something else was the brainchild, actually, of our capital planning manager, whose team runs another consent decree managed project. We have lots of programs on the consent decree, and that one's called the STACK program. I won't go into a ton of detail, but that program manages a system of credits that ensures 5 times the flow is removed from the sewer for every net addition in that area. And what this enables is MSD to responsibly permit development upstream of a sanitary sewer overflow while MSD works to solve the bigger hydraulic problem that causes the SSO. Sounded like exactly what we needed here. Substitute SBU for SSO. The challenge is that it's difficult for MSD to remove many of the sources of extraneous flow, to get those credits, and it's hard for us to remove those sources of extraneous flow that are downspouts and on a private property. That's challenging for us. Not impossible, challenging. So that's where the magic happened. MSD has set up a similar but separate credit system upstream of each Larissa, leveraging the same tactics to remove the extraneous flow that are in the STACK program, but applying it to SBU areas. And by partnering with a municipality who can more effectively address the private side sources, we have found a collaborative win-win solution. So this is how this would work under the proposed IGA as a model for this program going forward. MSD identifies the private side I&I in excess of what they need to remove. Sharonville removes, and Sharonville is the one in this instance, they would remove those flows from the private side. And Sharonville is already, we're talking with them, they've already looked at grant programs and other things that they can do to assist their residents to do that work. Meanwhile, we remove equal amount from the public side and hold those credits in our public pool of credits for Sharonville. Under the IGA, they would be held for Sharonville. We go back and we confirm those removals have actually happened, and then we credit one for one, public side to private side credits to Sharonville once they are confirmed that we've removed all that flow. With these credits achieved, the development can proceed. So the next steps to move forward with this is, as I said, there's an IGA that has been reviewed by county administration and legal that is before your consideration on Thursday's board meeting, I believe. We hope you approve it. Meanwhile, MSD will continue discussing similar arrangements with both Springdale and Blue Ash, who have developments under review, very similar, as well as pursuing other ways to get to yes. Finally, assuming this is favorably received, we'll coordinate with the county administration and conduct a broader outreach campaign with all the municipalities in the district service area. Thank you for your support of MSD's SBU program, which has been going on for over 20 years, and one of our new strategic risk reduction initiatives. I'd love to answer any questions that I can at this time.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I think this is the first time I've been so excited about MSD.
I'm
Really
excited to hear that.
Yeah, you did a great job. I just had one question where it says under collaborative strategic risk reduction, you said the public side equivalents are credited to Sharonville one-on-one when removed. What does credited mean? Does it mean that
Sure.
Go ahead.
So the way the program works is that if you do a certain type of repair, you get credit for a number of gallons.
Okay.
Number of gallons. So what we did is we looked at this particular development. I can run some numbers really fast. You need 82,000 gallons per day removed from the system to allow this development to go in. So we split that in half. And said 42,000 gallons half of it has to be removed on the public side and half of it to be removed on the private side. This is where we found a good, sorry?
I'm going.
Okay, so to remove the 42,000 gallons, they have to do a certain number of defects that they will fix. We've identified those defects. For example, I had a picture up there of a downspout that goes into the ground and is most likely going into that home's French drain and drainage system. They remove that, put it out onto their driveway or onto their grass, they get credit for 400 gallons removed.
So when you say credit and you're trying to explain it to me, does that mean that MSD is going to come and review and make sure that amount was taken out? Are you?
Yes, we have a couple steps in the process, and we have technologies by which we go back to the homes afterwards and confirm that those things have been fixed. We don't have to go back and flow monitor. The way the program is set up, and there are a lot of research and studies went in and said, okay, downspouts generally add this much gallons. If we go there first and it was into the ground, we go there 2 months later and it's not on, comes out on the ground, then you get credit for that downspout removal. There's 400 gallons, check. We have a very robust system we've set up to track those, and that's how they would get credit for. We'd go back out there and confirm.
Okay, thank you so much. Commissioner Dreehouse.
Thank you. I always get excited about MSD. By the way, that's my reputation. So I'm thrilled to have you here. I love to talk
Thank you.
about SBUs and overland flooding.
We hate when they happen, but
Yeah, that's right. Well, I hate when they happen. I've had them happen, actually.
Yeah.
Me too.
But good to discuss. And this approach, this more preventative approach, is something I think that we've been asking for. So really thrilled to look at this strategy that you are looking to employ here. I know MSD is always trying to think about how to prevent SBUs, but really, really like the bent of this program. So I heard you say that when you're trying to prevent the water from going into the system, that there are some public structures and there are some private structures that all contribute to that, right?
Yes.
And so when you say a community is going to help remove the flow, what exactly does, in the case of maybe Sharonville or anybody else, what does that exactly mean? Are they literally going to these homes and looking at downspouts? Are they looking at impervious surfaces that are owned by a business owner in the community? I mean, I don't know what that means.
Sure. Right now, we one of the beauties of this is leveraging a program that already existed and has been vetted with the EPA and such. And so we're using the same tactics and tools that are in the STACK program. And there are certain specific things in there that say, if you remove a downspout from the sewer, you get this much credit. If you remove driveway drains, is another one. Depressed driveways are notorious for being maybe at or below the storm sewer, so they have to come into our sewer. So these are connections on private property that are contributing flow. You mentioned impervious surface specifically. That is not one of the ones covered in this program that says if you remove this impervious area, you get X amount of credit. That is something that we could look to expanding this program or the STACK program as well, removing impervious surface. But right now it's somewhat limited to removing downspouts, driveway drains, repairing manholes, sewers in the street. That's the stuff that we do on the public side.
Why wouldn't you include impervious surface in this?
I don't know why it wasn't included when the program was first created, but it's something we can look at expanding and considering.
Like the volume would be so much higher from the impervious surface than it would be from a downspout, right? I just feel like maybe a bigger bang for the buck, if you will. And so I'm just wondering, because certainly there are plenty of parking lots. Sharonville in particular has plenty of parking lots, and if people were to be incentivized to capture some of that flow or plant trees or do something that they're not doing now to capture that runoff, it seems to me that would be a great fit for this program.
So this is one of our initiatives, and this is particularly in a separated area where that impervious surface is already disconnected from our sewer.
Oh, okay.
So what we're having to target with this is things that shouldn't be getting into the sanitary sewer but are.
Okay.
And so this application is in separated areas. So that I should have made that clear. That answers
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. I got you. I didn't realize that this was only
Didn't make
applied
that clear
to
enough.
separated areas.
This application is to separated areas. In combined areas, we have to look at other strategies of ways to say yes. Looking at increased detention, reduced impervious area. Yes, you're very right. That would be high on the list in those areas, in combined areas.
Okay. So, again, great program, maybe a model for something bigger. But when you talk about then, let's say Sharonville again, and how the community is going to help reduce the flow, are they adding financial incentives from their own budgets or something? I mean, how does that work?
That's our understanding, and we haven't gotten into the details of how they're doing it. They're bringing those ideas forward to their side, and that's where we're saying through this IGA, we'd split the credits needed. And on the private side, we can tell you where those are because we've done intensive studies of our entire service area to identify these. And we can, so we're not even asking Sharonville to find them. We know where they are. We can tell Sharonville where they are, downspout by downspout, house by house, and say, if you can figure out how to get these out, you get credit for that. So they're talking about grants and other mechanisms that they would be funding to help their students, because then it's that last mile challenge, like it's house by house, and they're better suited to do that than we are. In fact, some communities have their own laws and bylaws about how stormwater has to be treated in their jurisdiction that complicate this. So we can't, if they can change their incentives internally, then it helps out. Each community is a little different, but that's how they bring something to the table that we're not able to do as effectively.
Yeah, so when we hear from them, and I don't know if you guys will be here for that, I know we've got that vote coming up. I'd be really interested to know what they're budgeting for that, just so that we can maybe talk to other communities about replicating something like that. Whether or not we've got that cluster that you pointed out in a community or not, it's always a benefit to get these communities to think through.
Yes, we would love to.
Yeah, so I wonder, and they're going to say, well, we can't afford it. So I would love to know what the budget is in Sharonville, and how they're applying that, and what the incentives look like on a kind of an individual downspout by downspout basis.
Sure.
Just to dig in just a little bit more on that, so that we can think about the replication of the program. I just think it's a great idea. And I do wonder about the application then in an area where we've got combined sewers and applying some of the same techniques or incentives in some of those areas. But I assume that's further down the road. But I'm excited about this. We talk a lot about prevention, and here we are. And you all are bringing something to us that's exactly what we've been asking for. So I really do appreciate it, and appreciate the information here. Do we know when is the Sharonville project on our agenda? It's on Thursday. Okay. So I would, who's coming in to talk about that? Do you know?
MSD is presenting the IGA. We've worked with Sharonville. They've reviewed it. They've signed it. Your staff has, or the county administration has reviewed it.
Okay.
And so the IGA does not go into those details of how they're funding it. Obviously, it is the agreement with MSD that will set up this split, which is different than what we do in the SSR areas.
Can you get that budget information by?
I can ask
if you
them.
don't mind? Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
And I saw you also said continuing discussions with Springdale and Blue Ash, so it's
Yes.
not final, but they're looking at it also.
Yes, ma'am.
good.
They similarly, have developments that are getting close and are in areas that can add more flow. And so we're working with them and identifying what net additions would be needed and how to do it.
And so as you look at the percentage of contribution from each entity, do you have a standard of how much they need to?
Our plan now is to stick with 50-50.
That's the standard for all three of these.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Welcome. Thank you.
Diana. Okay. Okay, next order of business is item 4, executive